God, it's good to be recording again. So Vital Shell came out, and, well, I had just enough money left in my Steam wallet to grab it. I did, and now I'm doing a video on it because the dev commented on my video on the demo, and now I feel like I have to do what I can to support this game. I'm ride or die now. It's kind of funny, I suddenly have so much I want to cover. I kind of had that thing where I'm not really into any games at a given moment, so I keep picking up more and more games, and then suddenly I have too many games to play. But I didn't really want to push this back. Again, the developer commented, I felt good about that and wanted to support them, though this still ended up getting pushed back because I ended up getting sick, and that pushed back audio recording a week and a half. And then I realized I also kinda wanted to cover a bunch of other smaller games. I realized I also covered some indie games last February, and then I also realized that combining multiple subjects into one video never does well for me, so I'm gonna make this a bunch of shorter videos. So now that's February's thing. It's a month where I do a bunch of shorter videos on smaller titles I don't know how to fit elsewhere. Let's see if this lasts for more than just this year. So, getting back to the actual subject, in case you missed my Next Fest video, which you probably did, you're probably wondering what Vital Shell is. Well, it's a Vampire Survivors-like, or a Bullet Heaven as I've heard them called, though really this is more of a 20 minutes till dawn-like, and the Bullet Heaven moniker doesn't really fit as much. You have a decent amount of firepower, but generally not the screen-filling, blinding barrage of projectiles that you get in something like Vampire Survivors, and instead there's a lot more focus on maneuvering and sometimes on taking manual control of your aim to prioritize targets. So a bit more twitch action and player skill focus than Vampire Survivors, which if you're like me, you probably prefer anyway. The first thing you'll notice is, of course, the aesthetics of the game. They're the reason I picked this game's demo up at all. This is the most PlayStation 1 Armored Core looking game since PlayStation 1 Armored Core. Every choice feeds this aesthetic, and I love these blocky polygonal mechs. I'm sadly not very articulate when commenting on visual design, but I do like this a lot. Oh, and the new boss intro cutscenes that were in the demo, absolutely fantastic because they fit the aesthetic so well. As you'd expect for a game of this genre, as you progress through the waves, using careful maneuvering and an iframe dodge mechanic to survive, you of course gain a variety of upgrades. Collecting the crystals enemies leave behind lets you level up to gain stat boosts. They're auto-collected at the end of each wave, but if you do grab them manually, you do get more points. On top of this, at the end of each wave, you'll get a more significant upgrade. Most notably, over the course of a run, you'll gain 2 weapons in addition to your frame starting weapon, and gems that you can slot into a weapon of your choice, up to a maximum of 4 gems a weapon. The weapons are sufficiently varied, and while most gems only provide stat boosts, once you fill up all the slots on a weapon, you gain a resonance effect based on the colors of the gems, which serves as your special weapon upgrade mechanic these games tend to have. In this case, since the resonance effects are tied to what stats you increase via the gems, but not to the weapon itself, it opens the door for a lot of creativity and using weapons even when building for a different damage type. Because you can make most things work, you're not excessively at the mercy of the RNG. And there is a bit of an emphasis on playing with the hand you're dealt, because the reroll mechanic, even after some updates did make it a little bit more generous, is a bit stricter than other games of this sort. I actually really prefer this. The combination of being able to make most things work while having a less generous reroll system makes the randomness feel more interesting, rather than just being a bump in the road in getting to your inevitable, more optimized build. As for other strengths of the game, I do really like the enemy variety here. In some games in the genre, enemies can feel a bit interchangeable, just a horde that's thrown at you. Compared to other games in the genre I've played, I think Vital Shell has the most distinctive enemies with distinctive appearances and patterns that force you to maneuver thoughtfully within the relatively cramped arenas. The enemies are identifiable and distinctive, and as they get more intense throughout the game, it helps reduce the chances that this will fall into the late game trap that many of these games can fall into, where at a certain point in the run you don't have to even really think anymore because your build is just that overpowered. Plus, they've done a good job of improving the build variety from the demo thanks to the increased selection of items and playable frames. While in the demo, critical hit builds stood out a bit too much, now there's a bit more variety. In particular, some options that make defensive and healing builds more viable, something that's always a little tricky in a genre that tends to value overwhelming firepower. Plus, as mentioned, you're fairly free to pick whatever upgrades you like. It always feels like there's a good variety of viable builds. Though there is one issue in that sometimes key upgrades require you to perform some fairly specific tasks to unlock them to show up in the rotation. This is to be expected for the genre, of course, but sometimes it does feel like the item missing is the key one that makes a build viable, and oftentimes the task is something that you have to really actively try to chase, making certain builds just not as viable until later on when you're mostly cleaning up the remaining unlocks. And lastly, I really want to emphasize that I appreciate the way they embrace being a more player skill focused version of the genre. It's more tense and exciting, and it's much harder to hit a late game stage where you're so overpowered you're just waiting for the run to end. They also embrace this by having meta progression not be as critical as some others in the genre. While unlocking things for builds is certainly a thing, the stat boosts you can accumulate are decent, but not so big or critical to the balance that you feel like you're handicapped before you get them, as can be the case in many other games in the genre. Most of the strength you accumulate as you play more is from the increased build variety available, access to higher tier gems, and of course you as a player getting better. It's a subtle improvement rather than feeling like a bit of a stat check that you can only overcome by failing enough times that you can afford the upgrade. Player skill focus doesn't really mesh well with a game that makes you feel like you need to have numbers that are big enough before you're allowed to win. The game's also refreshingly brisk. It's not going to take you an unreasonable amount of time to unlock everything. Took me about 20 hours to get the majority of the unlocks, and then another 10 to clear out the last couple of particularly stubborn ones. Compared to other games in this genre where things can get a bit unnecessarily drawn out if you want to go for completion. And if you think that makes this game worth less, even though it's still a reasonable runtime, good news, it's $6. It's definitely worth it if you like these sorts of games. It's easily my new favorite in this genre, and it's great to support a new indie game dev. And to the developer, if you're watching this one too, amazing work. I look forward to seeing what else you do, especially what you do in graphic design, because I just love how this looks. So that's kind of it. Look, I'm doing 3 videos this month, so of course they're not going to be long ones. The last one might be a decent length, but you're gonna have to wait a bit for my first hour-long retrospective of this year. But let me know what you thought of Vital Shell in the comments below. I'll see you next week for my yearly video on some shameless weeb shit. But for now, this is Mikhail, signing off.